The raindrops in Manhattan always hit the glass with a heavy, rhythmic thud, sounding like a countdown timer. At 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday, Chloe Miller placed a neatly printed sheet of paper onto the walnut desk. It was a standard, emotionless resignation letter, stripped of any corporate pleasantries. Across the desk sat Julian Vance. His tailored charcoal suit was as immaculate as his reputation in the venture capital world, his Windsor not perfectly centered. He didn't look at the paper. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on his vintage Patek Philippe, which he was slowly wiping with a microfiber cloth. "Is this another one of your tactical moves, Chloe?" Julian's voice was smooth, carrying the natural arrogance of old money. He didn't look up. "Because if you're trying to leverage a higher commission for the tech acquisition next quarter, it's unnecessary. I've already approved your bonus." Chloe leaned back against the leather chair, her fingers casually tearing at the green cardboard sleeve of her empty Starbucks cup. It was a nervous habit, but her voice was remarkably steady, carrying the crisp, dry tone of a late-night podcast host. "It's not a tactic, Julian. It's a departure. My contract with Vance Capital expires at midnight. In exactly 15 minutes, I am no longer your senior public relations director. Or your shadow." Julian finally paused his movements. He set the watch down, its ticking sound barely audible against the downpour outside. He looked at her, his eyes carrying that familiar, condescending amusement that had kept Chloe chasing his approval for 3 long years. He believed he knew her completely, her coffee preferences, her ambition, and the way she used to look at him with unshielded devotion when they stayed late in this very office. He believed she was entirely under his control. "You won't leave," Julian said, his tone casual, almost dismissive as he leaned forward. "Where would you go? The boutique agencies in Brooklyn? Or back to Ohio? You built your entire network here under my name. Without the Vance umbrella, Manhattan is just a very expensive, very cold island. Don't let your emotions ruin your career, Chloe. We've discussed this. Personal feelings have no place in this office." 3 years. For 3 years, Chloe had misread his professional reliance as a prelude to something deeper. She had run his crises, managed his public image, and swallowed her own pride whenever he drew a cold, ironclad line between work and us. Just last week, when she finally asked if they were ever going to be more than a secret partnership, he had adjusted his tie and said, "You're indispensable to the firm, Chloe. Let's keep it that way." That was the moment the ancient clock in her mind finally stopped ticking. "You're right about one thing," Chloe said, standing up and grabbing her trench coat from the rack. She didn't look angry, she looked profoundly bored. "Personal feelings don't belong here. That's why I'm taking mine elsewhere. Goodbye, Julian." "Chloe," Julian called out, his voice dropping a fraction, losing a sliver of its usual composure as she walked toward the door. "If you walk out that door tonight, don't expect me to call you back. You had your chance to be part of the largest expansion in this firm's history. If you leave, you're on your own." She didn't pause. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, cutting off his voice. The elevator ride down to the lobby was dead silent. As soon as the doors opened, Chloe pulled out her iPhone. With a few swift, deliberate swipes, she did what she should have done 12 months ago. Julian Vance, personal. Julian Vance, office. Julian Vance, secretary. All moved to the blocked list. She deleted his WhatsApp thread, unfollowed his private Instagram, and wiped her cloud backup of every photo that contained his shadow. It wasn't an act of rage, it was a cold, systematic formatting of her hard drive. Outside the lobby, Marcus Thorne was waiting in an idling black Uber. Marcus, her longtime industry rival turned secret co-conspirator, lowered the window, a bright pink Skittles candy tucked into the corner of his mouth. "Did the Ice King melt, or did he try to freeze you out?" Marcus asked, offering her a dry, sarcastic smirk. Chloe climbed into the back seat, the smell of rain and wet asphalt clinging to her coat. "He thinks I'm going to a boutique firm in Brooklyn to cry over a pint of Häagen-Dazs." Marcus chuckled, tossing a yellow Skittles into his mouth. "Excellent. Let him keep thinking that while the movers empty your apartment. The red-eye to London leaves Heathrow in less than 24 hours for your onboarding, but our flight to JFK on the return is already booked for next year. Welcome to the real world, partner. As the car pulled into the neon-lit blur of the West Side Highway, Chloe looked out at the disappearing skyline. Back in the penthouse office, Julian Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, holding his phone. He dialed her number, ready to offer a calculated, icy reprimand to bring her back to her senses. Asterisk, the number you have dialed is not in service. Asterisk. Julian frowned, a minor, unfamiliar prickle of annoyance rising in his chest. He tried again. The same automated, indifferent robotic voice answered. He walked back to his desk, looking at the empty Starbucks cup she had left behind, its green label completely torn to shreds. For the first time in his meticulously organized life, Julian felt a subtle, unsettling shift in the room's temperature. But he shrugged it off, adjusting his cuffs. She'll call by Monday, he thought. They always do. He had no idea that Chloe Miller wasn't just leaving the building, she was resetting the entire board. 14 months later, the autumn air in Manhattan carried the familiar scent of roasted chestnuts and damp concrete. Inside the bustling, high-ceiling terminal of JFK, Chloe Miller adjusted her oversized sunglasses. She looked different. The hesitant deference that used to soften her shoulders was gone, replaced by the sharp, unyielding posture of someone who had just successfully managed a multi-million-pound tech merger across the Atlantic. The London weather was terrible for my hair, but wonderful for our portfolio, Marcus Thorne said, dragging a Rimowa suitcase behind him as they walked toward a waiting town car. He popped a green Skittles into his mouth. Vance Capital is currently bidding for the Omni Media restructuring. Julian thinks he's the only predator in the waters. Chloe checked her tablet, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the screen. He's comfortable, Marcus. And a comfortable man is easy to blindside. He still thinks we're a ghost story. Over the past year, Chloe and Marcus had quietly established Thorne and Miller Consulting. They didn't start in a flashy midtown office. They operated through European shell accounts and high-profile word-of-mouth successes in London's tech hubs. To the Wall Street elite, they were a nameless rising tide. To Julian Vance, they didn't exist at all. Julian's world was rigid, built on the assumption that once you were cast out of his circle, you ceased to matter. The ultimate test came 3 days later at the annual Plaza Hotel Charity Gala, a high-society hunting ground where everyone who was anyone in venture capital showed up to drink champagne and lie about their quarterly earnings. Chloe stood near the ice sculpture, wearing an asymmetrical emerald silk dress that made her look like a razor blade wrapped in velvet. She was sipping a club soda with lime, no alcohol, keeping her mind sharp. "Look who just walked in," Marcus whispered into his glass. "Still wearing the same Windsor knot. I swear that man has a ruler in his closet." Julian Vance entered the ballroom, flanked by 2 junior associates who looked terrified of making eye contact with him. He looked exactly as he had 14 months ago, impeccably groomed, radiating an aura of absolute certainty. But as he scanned the room, his eyes caught the emerald dress. He froze. Chloe watched his expression shift in real time, from professional indifference, to disbelief, to a sudden, dark flash of possessiveness. He didn't wait to finish his conversation with a prominent city councilman. He excused himself mid-sentence and walked straight toward her, his strides long and purposeful. "Chloe," Julian said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate register he used to use when they were alone in his office. He stopped exactly 2 feet away, invading her personal space. "You're back. You never called." Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't look flustered, nor did she display the angry satisfaction of someone trying to prove a point. She simply smiled, the polite, empty smile she reserved for difficult journalists. "Mr. Vance," Chloe said, her voice smooth and entirely professional. "Good evening." "Yes, I'm back. New York is always lovely in October." Julian's brow furrowed slightly at the formal address. He glanced at Marcus, then back to Chloe, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of the woman who used to cry when he ignored her texts. Mr. Vance? We're doing that now? Chloe, you vanished. You blocked my number. It was incredibly unprofessional. If you were upset about how things ended at the firm, we could have had a civilized dinner to discuss your exit package. My exit was perfectly civilized, Julian, Chloe replied, taking a slow sip of her club soda. My contract ended, and I moved on to better ventures. There was nothing left to discuss. Better ventures? Julian let out a short, condescending laugh, leaning in closer. I heard you went to Europe. Doing freelance PR for tech startups? You're wasting your talent, Chloe. I'm actually looking for a new communications lead for the Omni Media acquisition. It's a $10 billion deal. Come back to Vance Capital. I'm willing to overlook your little sabbatical. He reached out, his hand moving toward her elbow in a gesture that was entirely about reasserting ownership. Before his fingers could touch her silk sleeve, Chloe stepped back, smoothly picking up a stray napkin from the high-top table. Thank you for the offer, Julian, but I don't do freelance work anymore, Chloe said, her eyes locking onto his with a cold, terrifying clarity. And as for the Omni Media deal, you should check your SEC filings tomorrow morning. Thorne & Miller has just secured the exclusive advisory rights for the Omni Media board. We aren't looking for a job at your firm. We're looking to acquire your targets. Julian's hand remained suspended in the air. For a fraction of a second, his perfect composure shattered, his eyes widening as the information registered. Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Vance, Chloe said softly. She turned on her heel, her emerald dress catching the light as she walked away, leaving Julian standing alone by the melting ice sculpture, his phone already buzzing violently in his pocket with an emergency alert from his legal team. The boardroom of Omni Media on the 44th floor of a midtown skyscraper looked like a glass cage suspended over the city. Outside, a gray autumn fog blurred the horizon. Inside, the tension was sharp enough to cut. Julian Vance sat at the far end of the mahogany conference table, his fingers laced together, his knuckles white. For the past 48 hours, his analysts had been frantically scrambling to understand how a virtually unknown consulting firm had managed to lock up 40% of Omni Media's independent shareholder votes. The heavy glass doors swung open, and Chloe Miller walked in. She wore a tailored charcoal wool suit, her hair pulled back into a flawless, unforgiving bun. Marcus Thorne followed her, carrying a sleek leather portfolio and a small, translucent cup filled with blue Skittles. You're late, Chloe, Julian said, his voice cold, projecting an authority he no longer entirely possessed in this room. He didn't look at the board members around him, his eyes were locked on her. This is a closed-door evaluation. If your little boutique firm is here to pitch a minor PR campaign, you should speak with marketing downstairs. Chloe didn't take the seat at the opposite end of the table. Instead, she walked straight to the center, standing directly across from Julian. She unlocked her tablet and connected it to the massive wall projection system with a single tap. Mr. Vance, let's skip the condescension. It doesn't suit the current financial reality, Chloe said, her voice echoing clearly through the high-end audio speakers of the room. We aren't here to pitch a campaign. We are here as the designated representatives of the Vanguard Group and the Sterling Trust, who happen to hold the controlling interest in Omni Media's debt restructuring. Julian's face went entirely rigid. He stood up, knocking his leather chair back a few inches. That's impossible. Vance Capital has an exclusive negotiation window. The board agreed. The board agreed to your terms when they thought you were their only lifeline, Chloe interrupted, her tone completely devoid of malice, carrying only the absolute weight of data. But while you were busy giving interviews to Forbes about your unstoppable expansion, Thorne & Miller was in London, restructuring Omni Media's European bonds. We didn't just match your offer, Julian. We bought the debt out from under you. A murmur broke out among the older board members. Julian looked around the room, realizing for the first time that the deferential nods he usually received were gone. The faces of his colleagues were blank, assessing him not as an old money titan, but as a liability. Chloe, Julian muttered, lowering his voice, attempting to re-establish the private channel they used to share. This is reckless. You're playing with billions of dollars just to settle a personal grievance. If you're angry about the past, we can fix it. Name your price. Partner status at Vance Capital. A seat on the executive board. Whatever it takes. Chloe stopped. She looked at him, and for a brief moment, Julian saw a flash of the woman who had spent 3 years waiting for him to notice her worth. But the expression vanished instantly, replaced by a devastating, pitying smile. You still think this is about you, Julian, Chloe said softly, her voice carrying a dry, ironic amusement. You think I spent 14 months in London, sleeping 4 hours a night and executing a complex cross-border financial strategy, just to get a reaction out of a man who can't even look at his own flaws? That's your grand delusion. You think you're the sun, and everyone else is just supposed to orbit your ego. She tapped the screen, and a final slide appeared, a detailed breakdown of Julian's over-leveraged positions in the tech market. Your exclusive negotiation window expired at midnight, Chloe continued, turning back to the rest of the board. Thorne and Miller's proposal has already been ratified by the credit committee. As of 10 minutes ago, Vance Capital's bid is officially rejected. Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance. Your team can collect their files from the receptionist. Julian stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly that his signet ring dug into his skin. His immaculate Windsor knot suddenly felt suffocatingly tight. For the first time in his life, he was the one being dismissed, excluded, and completely erased from the narrative, by the very woman he had told would be nothing without his shadow. Marcus Thorne popped a blue candy into his mouth and leaned back in his chair, giving Julian a slow, mocking salute. Welcome to the real world, buddy. The rain returned to Manhattan by November, colder and sharper, turning the streets into glistening black ribbons. Chloe Miller pulled her cashmere collar up against the wind as she stepped out of the West Village bistro where she had just finalized a partnership with the city's largest retail conglomerate. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a notification from her building's smart security system. Unidentified visitor in the lobby area. Time, 10:14 p.m. She didn't need to look at the grainy security footage to know who it was. When she reached the glass canopy of her apartment building, she saw him. Julian Vance was standing near the limestone pillars, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a dark wool overcoat. For the first time since Chloe had known him, his hair was slightly disheveled, dampened by the mist, and his tie, that perpetual symbol of his rigid control, was completely missing. He looked like an actor who had wandered off the set of a high-society drama into the harsh reality of a midnight street. Chloe, he said, stepping out from the shadow of the pillar. His voice lacked the smooth, resonant authority of the boardroom, it sounded hollow, strained by weeks of public market defeats. Chloe stopped 3 feet away, her umbrella held steady, creating an impenetrable physical barrier between them. Julian. You're outside your jurisdiction. The Vance Capital offices are uptown. I don't care about the offices, Julian said, taking a step closer, his eyes scanning her face with a desperate intensity. I've been trying to reach you through your assistant for 3 weeks. You filtered my emails. You blocked my lawyers. You're systematically cutting off every pipeline my firm has to the tech sector. Is this what you wanted? To see me cornered? Chloe let out a short, quiet laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping against pavement. You think too highly of yourself, Julian. I don't design my business strategies around your personal ruin. You're just collateral damage in a much larger expansion plan. Don't lie to me, Julian snapped, his composure cracking completely, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled them from his pockets. You spent 3 years waiting for me. You knew every habit I had, every preference. You don't just erase that in a year. I made a mistake, okay? I should have recognized what we had. I thought you would always be there, behind the desk, keeping the world together while I built the empire. I'm ready to fix it now. I'll give you whatever you want. Just stop this war. He reached out, his bare hand trembling in the cold air, trying to grab the handle of her umbrella to force her to look at him without the shield. Chloe didn't flinch or pull away. She simply held her ground, looking down at his hand with a cold, detached curiosity, as if analyzing a strange specimen. "That's your fundamental flaw, Julian," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a calm, devastating whisper that cut through the sound of the rain. "You think everything can be bought, negotiated, or repaired with a contract extension. You didn't appreciate me keeping your world together, you appreciated the convenience of an underpaid, emotionally dependent anchor. But anchors don't grow, Julian. They stay at the bottom of the ocean. I chose to sail." She stepped to the side, her heels clicking sharply against the wet stone. "And as for your empire," Chloe added, looking back over her shoulder, her eyes reflecting the cold neon lights of the street. "You should check the midnight financial wire. Thorne and Miller just acquired the short positions on your family's primary real estate fund. By tomorrow morning, your liquidity will be entirely locked up in our escrow accounts. You aren't fighting a war with me, Julian. You've already lost it. Good night." She walked into the lobby, the heavy glass doors sealing shut behind her with a definitive, mechanical click. Outside, Julian stood alone under the freezing rain, his phone suddenly vibrating violently against his thigh with a cascade of urgent alerts from his chief financial officer. He looked up at the 20th floor, watching as a single set of windows lit up, completely beyond his reach, while the empire he had spent his life protecting began to crumble beneath his feet. The Rainbow Room at the top of Rockefeller Center was bathed in a soft, amber glow. It was the night of the Wall Street Leadership Awards, the most prestigious gathering of financial minds in North America. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and diamond necklaces, but tonight, all whispers centered around one name, Chloe Miller. In just over a year, she had pulled off the most aggressive market realignment the city had seen in a decade, transforming Thorne and Miller from a ghost operation into an absolute powerhouse. Chloe stood near the glass balcony, overlooking the vast, glittering grid of Manhattan. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown, her wrists bare except for a vintage, understated platinum watch. Marcus Thorne stood beside her, raising a glass of sparkling water. Vance Capital's board just forced Julian to step down as managing partner, Marcus said quietly, his tone unusually serious, though he still managed to pop a dark purple Skittles into his mouth. They approved our full acquisition of their tech portfolio at 5 p.m. today. It's over, Chloe. You didn't just beat him, you legally reorganized his entire life. Chloe looked down at the city, her expression entirely serene. I didn't reorganize his life, Marcus. I just stopped allowing his gravity to pull my world out of alignment. Before Marcus could reply, the crowd near the entrance parted slightly. Julian Vance walked into the room. He didn't have his usual entourage of terrified junior associates. He was completely alone. His tuxedo was intact, but his eyes were sunken, carrying the hollow, haunted look of a man who had watched his entire identity dissolve in a matter of weeks. He looked around the glittering ballroom until his gaze landed on Chloe. He didn't hesitate, he walked straight toward her, ignoring the whispers and pointing fingers of his former peers. Chloe, Julian said as he reached the balcony. His voice was cracked, stripped of all old money pretense, leaving only a raw, desperate vulnerability. Please. Just 5 minutes. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing, but Chloe gently placed a hand on Marcus's arm. Give us a moment, Marcus. It's all right. Marcus looked at Julian, then at Chloe, gave a short nod, and walked away into the crowd. Julian stepped closer, his hands gripping the brass railing of the balcony so tightly his knuckles turned white. The board stripped me of my voting rights today, Chloe. My family's fund is gone. Everything I built, everything I used to define who I am, you took it all. I took nothing, Julian, Chloe said, her voice smooth, calm, and completely devoid of anger. It was the tone of a judge reading a mathematical certainty. You lost those assets because you overleveraged your positions based on pure arrogance. You believed your name made you invincible. I simply let the market correct your mistake. I don't care about the firm anymore, Julian burst out, his eyes turning red as he looked at her, his voice trembling with a terrifying sincerity. I don't care about the money. I sat in my empty apartment last night, looking at your old desk, and I realized I don't know how to navigate this world without you. I was wrong, Chloe. I was blind. I'm begging you, let's start over. Not as a firm, but as us. I'll leave New York. We can go to London, Paris, anywhere you want. Just tell me I still have a chance. He reached out, his hand open, completely defenseless, pleading for her to take it, to give him the salvation he had denied her for 3 long years. Chloe looked down at his open hand. For a fleeting second, the ghost of the girl who used to wait by her phone until 3 a.m. flitted through her mind. But when she looked back up into Julian's desperate eyes, she felt absolutely nothing. No hatred, no triumph, no lingering pain. Just total, beautiful emptiness. You had your chance, Julian, Chloe said softly, her voice carrying a calm, absolute finality that echoed louder than the jazz band playing in the background. You had 3 years of my absolute loyalty, my time, and my brilliant mind. And you threw it away because you couldn't love anything that didn't serve your ego. Now? Now watch me take the world without you. She didn't wait for his response. She didn't look at the tears finally spilling over his eyelids. Chloe turned away from the railing, her midnight blue dress gliding effortlessly across the floor as she walked back into the center of the ballroom. As she moved, the bright white flashes of a dozen photographers illuminated her path. The elite of Manhattan opened up a lane for her, welcoming her with applause and raised glasses. She walked toward the stage to accept her award, completely stepping into the light, leaving Julian Vance standing alone in the dark shadows of the balcony, a permanent spectator to the empire he could no longer touch. 3 days later, Chloe sat in the spacious, sunlit cabin of a private jet bound for Paris. The city of New York was nothing more than a collection of tiny, harmless gray blocks below the clouds. Marcus sat across from her, reviewing a new set of expansion documents on his tablet. Chloe picked up her fresh cup of black coffee. She looked at the white cardboard sleeve. It was completely smooth, completely intact. She didn't feel the need to tear the label anymore. She leaned back against the leather seat, took a slow sip, and closed her eyes as the plane climbed higher into the clear, endless blue sky.